would God really open a door like that for me? And if you grew up in a like I did, if you grew up in this kind of scarcity mentality that unless it's real, unless it's in my hands, unless it's tangible, it's not real. And I'm going, but yeah, that's where faith plays a part of this. But I'm telling you, my upbringing did not set me up for that.
Welcome to the In Between, a space for anyone navigating from the familiar to the unknown. Whether you're facing a personal, professional, or spiritual disruption, these conversations are here to help guide you through the questions, uncertainties, and opportunities that come with change. Hear from leaders, thinkers, and storytellers who found their way forward, and learn how you can too. No matter where you're starting, you don't have to navigate this alone. Today I'm sitting down with Tyler Reagin. Tyler's the author of The Life-Giving Leader and the founder of Life-Giving Co. He's a speaker, coach, and consultant. From his work with pastors through the 1010 Project to fostering emotional and spiritual health and leadership, Tyler brings a wealth of insight to navigating transitions and building flourishing cultures. So, Tyler, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks for having me. That was a pretty awesome bio right there. I felt great.
Good. I'm glad you feel that way. I appreciate you being here. So,
Yeah.
you've worn a lot of hats over the years, author, coach, consultant, and even more than that.
Yeah.
Can you share a bit of your journey and what led you to the work that you're currently doing?
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you having me on. I love the conversation you're having because it's such a weird, for many of us, when we step through a new season, which you'll hear even in my story, there's a bunch of those. Um, there's a faith element to it, right? There's a trusting element to it. And, one of the things I always talk about with my kids is I want them to have, my two boys, I want them to have a model of what it looks like to trust God. Even we don't know what that thing looks like, but we sense it. We believe about it. We believe that our God above can talk to us about that stuff. So I've been trying to model that the best way I know how with my kids and my wife. And we're actually, even as we talk, we just decided about a month ago to move back to Atlanta. We're in Orlando right now. And we have aging parents. And so we just realized, man, they could use our help. And I have a job that I can kind of move around and do what I need to do. So we just walk through it again of like, okay, what do we feel? How do we do that? So we can get into more of that later. But yeah, I grew up in Atlanta. That's home for us. My wife and I are Georgia Bulldog graduates, and we're diehards. So the kids are too, which is a win for us. But I felt called to ministry in college, and started doing. I was a youth pastor at an Episcopal church. I'm about as ecumenical as it gets, Evan. So prepare yourself for that. But I was
Let's
a
go.
youth pastor at an Episcopal church. Grew up Southern Baptist, and then was a part of the Wesley Foundation at Georgia, which was a charismatic student ministry. So I've just got through those things. Was youth pastor. My wife and I got married. We've been married 23 years now. And I went to seminary up in Boston at Gordon Conwell. Loved my time there, but I've always had this kind of in world of production. Like my degree is in technology education. I've always loved that side of things, and ended up being able to help start a North Point partnership in Athens, which is where the University of Georgia is. So it's such a dream come true. And I was the service programming director. Never knew that job existed, and but I loved it. I could pastor, but also do help pastor the worship team and the production team and all that kind of stuff. And being around Andy was a dream in the sense of I love leadership, always have, and watching Andy process leadership on and off the stage was pretty amazing. So actually, I just got back this week from our 20-year anniversary of Athens Church, and I was only there like 18 months. But here's the thing, man. I was sitting there going, gosh, I remember when the four of us guys sat in the office for the first time, and we're like, okay, what does this look like? And now, 20 years later, they've had over 2,500 baptisms. They had 9,000 people at this arena to celebrate something I had a small part of being in. I mean, it was pretty amazing to be a part of something like that. And one thing that's unique about my story, I think, that I have found in God's grace is that I've had leaders in my life like that have invested in me who were significant leaders in the kingdom or in workplace or whatever that looks like. Guys like Craig Rochelle, guys like Andy Stanley, Robert Coleman, who was really close with Billy Graham and wrote the Master Plan Evangelism, discipled me when I was in college. My pastor, when I was the youth pastor of the Episcopal Church, is now the Archbishop of the North American Anglican Movement. So it's just like I just have had this gift, I think, of sitting around some of the best leaders I know and just continue to fall in love with this concept of how we lead affects everything. Like it really matters, you know? And so after my years at North Point, ended up taking over Catalyst from a friend of mine, Brad Lomenick, and ran that for about 6 years. And that was really great and really terrible and really hard and really awesome and all the layers that come in between. But it was, for me, who loves the local church and um, leadership, it was kind of a unbelievable experience. Got to meet a ton of people that became friends and still are friends to this day. And then, you know, with COVID and a lot of other things that kind of played out during that season, I transitioned to doing my own leadership consulting. And man, I've been doing it 6 years full time. It's a combination of faith groups, churches, but also I've really gotten, I don't even know how to say it. I feel like I'm pastoring more in the marketplace than I am even in the church right now, because this week I was with one of my clients and 3 of the one-on-ones turned into soul searching conversations about, I don't know what this all means and why does this matter? And, you know, I mean, it was crazy. Like, I was just like, I can't even believe I get to do this. And so I'm good at it. I'm about a year away. I just passed my first 2 comp exams to get through the PhD I'm in, and I'm about maybe 9 months away from being done with that. So it's just a lot of different, you see all those different layers. And then I spend most of my time now with those organizations. A lot of the work is on organizational design. On one church I'm working with right now is on transition of a founding pastor and how do you set it up for that next piece. You talk about a feeling of uncertainty and like, whew, like you got a whole organization going through it. That's fascinating. We've done that here at First Orlando in some ways. So anyway, I just, the space that you're talking about, but also all the leadership space is something that obviously gets me fired up.
Yeah, I love that. And I love your history. I love your background. I love that you seemingly are willing to pivot. You know, you haven't just, decided to stay in one lane even. Like,
Right.
even though it's been connected,
Right.
there have been lots of pivots. And one thing that you mentioned was like modeling a way of hearing or listening to God. You're wanting to do that for your kids, but I'm just wondering, what does that even begin to look like? So
Yeah.
what are the indicators that you've noticed that, oh wait, maybe there's something that's happening that is leading to change?
Yep.
And if so, like, how do you begin to listen for that or notice, pay attention to that?
So the word I would use is curiosity, and it's become a principle for me in general. So it could be like driving in this morning. Of course, Orlando's drivers are the worst in the world. So I find myself not in a spiritual place driving in Orlando here. But if there's somebody's name pops into my head that I haven't thought about in a while, I've made it a practice to text them that day, call them that day, and just go, hey, just thinking about you. Thought about you this morning. Hope you're doing well. And I cannot tell you the number of times that they will call me instantly or whatever and go, holy cow, like you need to know what I'm going through. Just kind of that little piece. Same goes with these little stirrings that happen in our hearts and our minds. So here's the way this played out for us when it comes to Atlanta. Like when I went into Thanksgiving week last year, there was zero orbit or thought of we're going to move back to Atlanta. Like, I mean, when I say zero, I mean less than zero. I have things that I felt like we were doing down here, even kind of building some stuff behind the scenes on some things. And we went to Atlanta, and the second day we were there, I realized I was watching my wife process what she was seeing with her parents, and my kids kept making these comments about how much they missed that and how much they missed that, and we didn't have conversations about it, but there was a little stirring in me of like, I need to pay attention to this. Like, I need to pay attention to this. And so then the next question I always ask myself is, Lord, if this is something you're stirring from me, or if this is something you're, poking my heart, you're trying to kind of get me thinking about, I got curious in a sense. And I went, what would be a step I would take if this is you? Does that make sense? Like it was just that's my simple question. If this is you, my curiosity thinks maybe it is. I don't know. It could not be. I don't know. If it's you, what's the step I can take this week towards that piece? It is not a full-on decision. It is literally just what is the step I would take if I knew this was you, this is the step I would take. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
So we spent the week, and I mean, it was becoming clear, like my family misses Georgia. That's home for us. My wife was feeling the weight of like she would love to be closer to her mom and dad to help. And so I honestly spent 2 weeks, did not talk to her about it, and just prayed, kind of did my own conversations with God, just kind of wrestled with it. And then I came back, it was actually from a 10-10 board retreat, and I came back and we had lunch, and I said, hey, we can move back. That's what we've always said. And man, I just saw the weight come off of her of like, like deep breath. Are you sure? And I said, we always say we can move back. Let me just do a little work. I just want you to know I'm willing to do that if we need to do that. And so that's the process I went through. And next thing we know, we all feel aligned. We sat with each of the boys and we processed with them by themselves. And we knew our youngest, like he's kept his bags packed for 2.5 years. So he's just going to kind of get back in the car. But my oldest is going to be a senior. So that's a big decision.
Yeah.
But at least we're going back to the school they were at before. They know people. So there was a lot of layers of that. Even can we get into that school? Because all these private schools have long waiting lists now. Well, the school's making a space for our 2 boys. So I checked on that. It's just these little layers. But it all started because I observed something and I didn't just let it go away. I went, I'm going to get curious about that.
Hey friends, I want to pause just for a moment. If you're navigating the complex and emotional process of leaving a mission-driven role, whether that's been ministry, nonprofit work, or any purpose-driven career, you're not just looking for a new job. You're wrestling with things like the personal, professional, and spiritual dynamics that come with all of this. Maybe you're asking things like, who am I outside of this role? What skills do I even have that can translate into the future? Will I ever find work that feels meaningful again? If this is resonating, download Finding Your Way to Flourishing. It's a free guide that I've put together for mission-driven leaders who find themselves in the midst of transition. This isn't just another guide, it's a thoughtfully crafted resource that's designed to help you begin processing your identity beyond the role that you're leaving. It can help you pinpoint which skills you can confidently bring into your new and next role. It'll help you lean into your faith and find peace during the midst of this uncertainty. Not overwhelming, it's not complicated. It's just the first step to getting some clarity and moving forward. You don't have to figure this all out alone, and I'd love to walk this journey with you. This guide is completely free, and you can grab your copy today by clicking the link in the description or in the show notes. Let's start making some sense of this transition together. Okay, now back to the conversation.
That has been my practice when it comes to how do I hear from God and make decisions. The other thing I would say, Evan, is we're just not scared to pivot. You mentioned that. And some of the catalyst stuff I went through and some of the career stuff I've gone through, honestly, have allowed me to not be fearful in that. Because I kind of love it. I always go, what's the worst case scenario? Like when we moved down here, I said, what's the worst case scenario? We moved back? Okay. Right? Does moving suck? Yes, it's terrible. Who wants to do that? But it's not the end of the world, and it's very doable. So I think we have just, and again, both my wife's side and my side of the family, they don't do that. Like they don't. Okay, my father-in-law his mind has been blown for the last 23 years because he's lived in the same house for, say 2 houses for 50 something years. Can't imagine this, that, and the other. But we live in a different place where it's going, we're going to follow the Lord. If he stirs us here, and I also know God goes with us too. You know what I mean? Like he's just good at that stuff. So anyway, that was a long answer to tell you. I think curiosity is one of the greatest things we can have when it comes to trying to hear the voice of the Lord.
No, that's fantastic. So I'm wondering, what would you consider, like in that process of even you noticed, you observed something, got curious about it. In your mind, was the next step like, because you also mentioned what's the best next step I could take towards to see? In your mind, is that the conversation with your wife? Is it just journaling? Was it praying? What was that next step that you would consider to have taken in that process?
Yeah. My first next step was to take a couple weeks of prayer journaling. I wrote down, I could pull it up. I wrote down, like, if we did this, what would that mean? If, how does this work for my job? How does it, like, I was just processing it privately and praying about it. And the last morning of our 10-10 board retreat, I got up early. We were in South Georgia, and I put on, I think it's the Bethel Peace album. I actually had never heard it, and it was so calming to me. It was really, really powerful for me. And then I just started praying, Lord, here, I'm willing to do whatever. Like, this works for me. This, all those kind of layers to it. And I just had a true sense of, like, yeah, okay, like this calm kind of peace of, I did not feel like I did not feel dejected. I did not feel frustrated. I did not feel scared. I felt peace. And it's never perfect. Like, that's the thing. I'm like, I'm just not afraid of making a mistake if we feel like we're pursuing the Lord, So yeah, that was my journey for 2 weeks, was really just going, how do I step into this faithfully, but also, and here's the other thing I would add, from a practical perspective, anything I can do to put my wife and my kids in a position to flourish is going to be the best thing I can do for my family. If that means I've got to travel a hair more because I'm going to come back to Orlando for some different things, so be it. If that means, like, I'm willing to take whatever I need to take, and again, none of that's negative. It's just, I'm saying, sure, I'll do whatever it takes. If you guys are flourishing and that's the place you're going to flourish, then I think God's in the middle of that. And so it was a little bit of combination of all those things.
No, I think that's helpful. And I love that framing, or that lens of, if there's family, what positions them to flourish. I think that's helpful too. So what do you think for those individuals, the leaders, people with dreams, people with these, maybe they are observing things. What do you think keeps them from getting more curious about that thing that they're observing, or even like feel stirring? Why do we sometimes, or why do others, maybe you at some point in your life, what keeps us from getting curious?
Yeah, for sure. I'm always, I mean, it's hard for all of us, right? Like, it's not like it's just a supernatural, like, oh yeah, I'm curious all the time and it works. Nope, everything's perfect. Great. I'm following the Lord all the time. I'm working on a third book about the things we allow. Like, Henry Cloud has a principle that leadership's not just what you do, but what you allow. And the principle, or the theory that I have, is that if we allow certain behaviors on our organization, around our people, whatever, that we lose influence for, it's usually because we allow something inside. And the things that could fall in that category could be insecurity. It could be fear. It could be cynicism. Like, do you know how many Christians are cynical? Like, and we critique everything, and we're like, would God really open a door like that for me? And if you grew up in like I did, if you grew up in this kind of scarcity mentality that unless it's real, unless it's in my hands, unless it's tangible, it's not real. And I'm going, but yeah, that's where faith plays a part of this. But I'm telling you, my upbringing did not set me up for that. There's work that requires. So I genuinely think a lot of us are held back because one time we maybe pursued something and it didn't play out. And then we're like, well, then I don't hear from God well. Or, we did this thing, we felt like we were following God, and it just collapsed around us. Like, those kind of moments can put cynicism in us, can put fear in us, can put insecurity in us. And I think quite often we can blame God for a lot of these different moments of our life. And I also think it's just life. Like, there's a teaching in life when you could actually fully pursue God's will and feel like it's right in the thing. And that door could close like crazy and hurt you. But the truth I have come to experience, and this is just in the same way curiosity's become a thing, even as I do my work with consulting, I'll lose clients here and there, and that hurts a little bit. Like, you're kind of like, oh gosh, what, like, and it's part of the job, it's fine. But here's where the posture that I've switched to, trying to be an abundant posture versus a scarcity posture, is thank you, Lord, for that great gift. Now I can't wait to see what margin why you're creating this margin for me. And I'll tell you, Evan, every no can be an upgraded yes. It like quite often, those no's are literally just the Lord going, "Oh, I got something better." But if you got that you thought was it, by golly, you're going to get a diminished product. But if you can just trust that this door closing is actually an upgraded yes on the other side, then whoo, watch out what happens. And I've had moments in my life where I remember one specifically where 4 no's, 4 closed doors that I was praying desperately for God to open, and he did not. And after the 4th one, there was an upgrade on the other side that was so much better, so much, further down like it was just all that was good. So I genuinely think a lot of it is our history, our self, understanding our childhood and different spaces of that, processing those things, because those are what trigger when we feel these moments of insecurity and uncertainty. And man, cynicism, fear, insecurity, anger, all those kind of unprocessed emotions can quite often keep us from that next thing. And I think if we go a step further, so many leaders don't believe that God might have great things for them because they have not experienced it like that. And I think there's this I don't think he has that for me, So that's a few thoughts.
No, that's great. So instead of filling when there is margin, like I think back to, I had some margin like from 2022 to 2023 where I was freelancing, I had space, and it provided me opportunity to start asking some questions about myself, start doing some, personal development, some spiritual growth, wrestling with things like, why do I keep encountering this same brick wall? Asking those types of questions. So when there is margin, how do we keep ourselves from filling that margin with all of the things that you mentioned, with insecurity, with fear, with negative mindsets? How do we use that margin space to actually ensure that we keep it as a space for God to fill with the good things that he may have in mind for us?
Right. Man, I wish I was an expert at this, because I mean, literally, when I tell you the last 4 weeks, I feel like it is daily. One day I'm feeling good and connected and aligned and feels like the open doors are there, feels like the work I've been doing is paying off. And literally within 24 hours, I feel the other end of that spectrum of oh my gosh, is this really going to work? Moving back, is that going to, am I going to lose any of these? Just literally, it's like, boom, boom. I just feel jolted because I feel like I'm on a roller coaster, which we're down here and we get on roller coasters, and the last roller coaster I rode hurt my back. So I'm just like, man, I just feel this jolting motion internally, and man, that's tiring. But I also think there's a refining in that. And I think sometimes without the wrestling, we're going to, maybe God's already showed up. But if I don't have to wrestle through those jolting moments, and then I see these good things that are happening in my world, I don't know that I'd recognize those as gifts from God or blessings or things that are powerful. The other thing is, even with 10:10, our heart is to teach leaders rhythm and rest and also trust in that, right? That's hard though. We have a culture that doesn't rest well. We have a culture that is if you're not working, if you're not hustling, I don't love that word but I also get it. It's one of those, I feel like I'm hustling all the time, but there's a guilt that comes along with the moments of not hustling. And yet we're called to rest, and we're called to be okay. And if you have a season of margin and all you do is try to hustle and work and do all the things, you're not ready for the next thing because you're exhausted. I'll never forget when my wife and I got married, we were in seminary up at Boston and no money. I remember going to seminary going, Lord, I already have student loan debt from college. I don't want to take on more. So I'm just trusting you. You've called me to do this. I'm trusting you. It was the second year. My church and stuff had kind of created a fund to help, scholarship me in some ways. And But we were looking at our fall payment and there was nothing, like nothing. And where did my mind go? Okay, well, Carrie, you go work a few more hours at Pottery Barn. Like I literally just started just striving. Okay, I'll move this piece. I can work this piece. We can pay this thing. And then that night, I remember sitting with her and I said, "Hey, I think we just need to pray for a minute about this. So let's just." And honestly, our prayer time wasn't even about God giving us the money we needed. It was more just honestly confession, just processing our lives with the Lord, and just the gratitude for where we were. The next morning, I walk in and in my mailbox, there's a little note that said, "Hey, by the way, your tuition was covered by one of her friends from high school who had paid for it 3 months before that." They had called on their own, they had checked in, and they had written a check to cover the cost of that thing. And I say that because my natural instinct was to grab it and fix it. And God was going, "That's not how this works sometimes." Like, be faithful, put your hands to the plow, do the work. But I'm paying attention. I've got things for you. And honestly, I think where his heart was moved by us just confessing and being closer to our Heavenly Father, not, "Please do this for me. Please do this for me. Please do this for me." So I feel you in that. But I think you have to fight a little bit of the temptation of our culture, which says hustle, hustle, hustle with every waking minute.
Yeah. And this is probably similar, so if so, we can skip it, but I'm just wondering, like, if you have additional thoughts. So in those seasons of doubt or uncertainty, any thoughts on how do you discern when it's time to push through or it's time to pivot? Like, how do you know when to, like,
Yeah.
obviously not just go all in on hustle culture, but how do you determine, okay, I need to push a little or pause or pivot?
Yeah. I This is going to sound like a very good Sunday school answer, but if you're not in a daily conversation and daily dependence on the Holy Spirit, you're going to have a hard time with this anyway.
Mm.
And so a lot of the moments where I have pivoted or not have been a day or two after the feeling, a week or two, when I actually took a minute, like, and you can see it back there's my little reading nook back there, where I sat in that chair and I just paused and I got quiet for a minute, and I just went, "Lord, help me figure out." And praying about this and and I think sometimes I really like to pray. I'd love for there to be ultimatums for time frames, but I don't, I try not to pray that way. I just kind of sit with him and go, "Hey, just keep guiding me. Give me direction. Give me those moments of inspiration, or let me use my. I mean, you've given me a lot of things, experiences in life that let me use my brain and my skill sets that you've given me to help me guide those moments." So, I think if you're not in a rhythm of quiet, I don't know that you'll know that.
Mm.
And I'm okay. Like, when I say this, like even today, I've had a couple things cancel or move around. Well, man, my first thought is, I have two, by the way, because I love to play. So I'm like, okay, can I go play golf? What does that look like? And the other side is, okay, what else can I catch up on? What are the things I need to do? But also maybe there's somewhere in between where I can just kind of do some work, catch up, and also enjoy today, relax a little bit, feel a little bit of, okay, it's Thursday, not really working tomorrow, just finished this comp exam, like I'm tired. So what does my rhythm look like today to do that? I would bet I'm going to be at a better place if I can take it at that pace today than feeling like, "Oh my gosh, I got 4 free hours. What does that look like? How many things can I check off the list?" I'm looking at my list right to my left, right? Like I can get after that, but that list stays populated.
Yes.
And I just find myself going, "What are the urgent things today? Let's knock those out, and then let's relax. My son's got a basketball game over in Melbourne tonight, so we'll load up and go do that. I've got a couple calls this afternoon." But I don't think I have to go hustle and find all the things today. I think today's kind of maybe a recoup day. I hurt my back a few weeks ago, so I worked out this morning. There's just a lot of layers of, like, man, how do I rest and have a good rhythm to this? And I genuinely think, Evan, it's those moments that I'm quiet enough, that I'm calm enough, that maybe God can stir another pivot or, put my attention elsewhere.
Mm. That's good. In your work with leaders, who maybe struggle to get quiet, and they're pacing towards exhaustion,
Yeah.
isolation, burnout. What do you think we often miss that's indicating that we're reaching a breaking point?
Man, there's a lot of the work I'm doing for my dissertation is around burnout and safety. And, there's an interesting thing. A guy actually did a whole dissertation on burnout in clergy and police officers and nurses because the helping industry tends to be on 24/7. And, you've heard the old adage like doctors make the worst patients. Well, pastors make the worst, like, recipients of, rest, because we feel that ministry is a 24-hour thing. And there are moments that is true. And that's why healthy boundaries and healthy rhythms are going to keep us in the game longer. But I think it's a combination of unmet expectations that are maybe never unspoken, maybe better than unmet, unspoken expectations you've put on yourself that nobody else has put on you. If you're in ministry or a helping industry in any type, you feel this constant calling piece. And like I said, when it came to the decision of moving back, it was calling. Sure, I know my calling. I'm in it. I'm plugging away at it. My calling is to put my family in the best possible position for them to be flourishing. That's it. And that isn't a super spiritual answer, although it's deeply spiritual. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those pieces. So I think the burnout we're seeing is too many hours. Our phones and our connectedness, like, is killing us. I have yet to see a research study that says being super connected to your phone is healthy. Like, it just doesn't. Teenagers with social media, you pick the thing. Like, I get home, the hardest part for me is getting home and dealing with teenager work. Like, parenting teenagers is maybe the hardest thing I've done as a parent. Like, it's deep. You know what I mean? There's a lot of emotion connected to it. So our phones create a 24/7 connectivity that we were never meant to have. So there's just layers and layers of our current culture. And here's where a lot of that comes from is people see on social media, because they're connected to it, these overnight sensations, or, like they just worked and I've been listening to the Elon Musk biography. You know what? All they talk about is the guy's out of whack because he works, he would go into these fits for months and sleep on the floor of the factory at Tesla to fix it. Well, great. And there's a genius in the willingness to do the thing, but he's on his fourth marriage. He's got 15 kids. He's a little bit off balance, it seems like. Well, I don't want to be around people I love some of the things he's created, but at what cost to himself and to other, places like that. So I think the burnout thing can be masked in genius. It can be masked in hard work. And yet, they talk in this book about the moments he would be just curled up under the executive conference room table because he was so burnt and done. And I think the old story of I'd rather burn out than flame. I don't know if that's a good one.
Yeah.
Like I do. My old mentor Peb Jackson used to say he wants to go out with the tank empty. That's not burnout. That was giving you everything I got until the Lord takes me home. That's a different conversation. Do you know what I mean? So, I think it's just significantly being intentional to go, if I don't pace myself and have a good rhythm and have some good boundaries in place, I am going to hit a place, especially if you're in a helping industry. It's really hard not to.
How do you start to open that conversation up? Maybe you're the one that's pacing that way, feeling that way. That there's all types of individuals that are. I've been there at different times. What makes in your work with the teams that you help and the organizations, the leaders, how do you approach that to begin making the space safe for people to begin even verbalizing some of those struggles that maybe they haven't been willing to talk about, or just have never felt like they've had the space to like bring those things to the surface? How do you make that space safe for people to start having those conversations?
Yeah, so I've stumbled apart, and I think this will be the centerpiece of the dissertation work I'm doing is this concept on called psychological safety. And it's actually most of the research prior to this is on teamwork and like teams that feel psychologically safe. In other words, their mind and their bodies feel comfortable. They don't feel like a bad idea is going to get them fired. There's a safety, a respect. There's a thing that happens. And here's what I believe is true is most of our, let's say pastors, because specifically with 1010 and what I've learned and watched there, they have very few spaces to say all the things. As a matter of fact, most of them have none because they don't feel psychologically safe to say it. Because let's say they go to their elder board and say, I'm struggling with an addiction. Well, guess what that elder board represents to them? Job security. Mm-hmm. And unless you happen to have a massively healthy, really good board who can handle something like that, you're not going to tell them that. And so then you go, okay, and most ministry leaders, the more successful they've become, the more isolated they become because all of their friends are now on payroll or go to their church and they're going, I can't tell him or her because they're a congregant or they are on my staff. Now there's okay, so where am I going to say this to? So what our theory was 5 years ago when we started it was going, what if we could put leaders in a space where nobody in that circle needs anything from them? Mm. They are not on. Now there's a reverse thing that happens is they kind of go into this weird detox because they're not in charge. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole nother conversation. But what we're learning is that if we can create psychologically safe space, in other words, if we can create a space where their body lets down, their guard lets down, there doesn't feel like there's any repercussions for saying, I'm not doing this well, I'm bad at this, I have this major addiction or challenge or sin that I'm struggling with. And what happens is when you put them around people that are in the same world but not their world, they go, oh, I had an elder like that, but the names are different. Oh, I've experienced that. So I think what we're finding is that if you don't have a safe group of friends, at least 1, 2, 3 people that you can say the last 10% to, then you're not in safe space. But safe space means there's a curation to that. There's something that has to happen. And that could be everything from where it is. Are we doing that outside? Are we doing it, like in a ballroom, whatever? It could be where. I think my gut is the majority of it is how and who. Like, what are we doing? Who's in that circle? And how do we curate that time? What are we doing to set them up to go, this is a trustworthy space? Because if I don't feel psychologically safe to do it, I'm probably not going to say all the things.
What are some of those things that you're doing that make it psychologically safe? Like, I mean, you mentioned maybe it's a different location. It's having a different group of people that need nothing from you. But when those conversations start to unfold, are there other things that you're asking? Are there certain things that you're doing?
Yeah.
How do they begin to feel safe? Or is it just those couple dynamics that you mentioned?
Those couple dynamics are huge. But so that's why when we started 1010, I was like, this cannot be just a weekend. Because imagine you and I would go out to Colorado and we're hanging out and, all of a sudden you finally feel free, a little bit safe to say, you're testing the waters, you say something, you finally say something you probably hadn't said in a long time. And then we get on a plane tomorrow and we don't see each other for the next year. Like, that's a normal retreat. Mm-hmm. And what I realized was going, man, that's not fair. That's not healthy. It can be healthy. It can be a good moment. It can be a catalytic moment. But there has to be a tail to this stuff. How do I feel safe for a period of time so that I can build a rhythm and an understanding that this matters in my life? That was the goal of going, we're going to do 12 months at least. Like, these guys have to be in safe community with the same people for 12 months. So we started by our first trip is always just an excursion of fun. Like we literally snowmobiling kicks off in a few weeks for 20 new pastors. A huge part of that is let's go have some fun. Let's go rip it on the trails and guys are out of their comfort zone. You know, got all these Florida boys in 2-degree weather trying to ride a snowmobile or whatever the thing may be. But at night, after a good dinner and after a long day, they start telling their story. And every group is led by somebody that's been through 1010 or somebody that coaches that we trust. We've partnered with Biola, so we have 12 months of content around resilience. So it's just a little piece of trust. Yeah, hey, the surveys are saying this is what we've learned. Data says this. And every month they're checking in with each other. Every month they're building a little more trust with each other. We're not trying to go there in week one. Like it's not real. Very few people are, unless you've been doing a lot of work on yourself. You know, even if you were to go to onsite, it takes 3 or 4 full intensive days for you to finally go, okay, okay, I think I can say this in this space. So the key for us is, again, we're creating that space every time. But at month 6, we take them through, we call it kind of a soul care therapeutic retreat in a sense of going, we've got counselors that are just prompting a little, asking some questions, but they're trained on how to kind of uncover the onion a little bit more. But hopefully, if all goes the way we pray about it, is they actually, because of the 6 months of being in circles together, they're ready. Like we don't need a couple days to get there. Like they're ready to go. And man, it works. Like, and I say that, like, yeah, there's always going to be an outlier where somebody's like, I'm good. Jesus is good. I don't need anything. But we try to feel that out. We've had plenty. Josh and I always, our co-founder, we always do the calls beforehand with the guys that are interested. And I can tell you, we've probably had 20 guys who are like, you're not a good fit for us because I can tell in the way they're talking that they're not going to go there. Well, okay. Then, but I can't let you hijack a group of guys that need to go there. So this probably isn't a good fit for us. Does that make sense? So there's a little bit of all of that. And then they'll finish out another 6 months. And then literally in a week and a half, our 4 groups that started last March, we're headed out to Texas to close out their year and kind of graduate. But those groups stay together. They stay in communication all the time. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I love that. You mentioned, you can hear when you're in that group, 20 people, is this a good fit? Some you're hearing things that are indicating, yeah, these are probably people that we want to like go on this venture with. And there's these other group of, no, they're probably not going to like be willing to go all in. What are the differences that you're hearing that are showing you like yes and no?
So the funny thing of that is they need to.
Yeah.
There's quite often there's a confidence/arrogance that borders on that line where we had one guy I can remember who actually went into it, and after the first trip he quit. But on the trip, a lot of us that have been around noticed like this constant like, oh, I don't want to do I don't need the counseling or the soul care thing. I'm good. Like, I'm good. That when I hear that word on a regular basis, I'm good. And again, we're not trying to get guys that are already off the rails. We're trying to get guys, we call it prehab for a reason. We're trying to create guardrails. We're trying to create but you can just tell, like you can just, there's an alignment or a misalignment when you're like, okay. And this is what they're used to portraying to everybody. Like one of our guys that went through year 2 or group 2 or 3 is now on our staff. He was that guy. He literally would say like, God is good all the time. I'm more blessed than I deserve. All the different phrases that we've all said for a million years. When he went through the kind of middle trip, God unlocked some stuff that happened in his past that he hasn't even remembered. But what had happened is he had put on a front that said, oh, it's good. I mean, I didn't die, so it's good. God's good, and all this stuff. That was deep work that he needed to do. So, but you can just tell, because we've been doing this long enough. If you talk to someone, you can do it too. In just a lunch meeting, you can tell when someone's going, like, there's guarded and then there's arrogant. And guarded is, I don't know if you're safe. Arrogant is, I don't need anybody. I'm good.
Yeah. Wow.
And there's a line we're trying to find in that.
That's great. I want to kind of pivot. I just have a couple more questions for you. Especially like you mentioned knowing your calling, but that calling, I kind of think of calling as expanding. And there's different people that I look at throughout the Bible. You look at the Apostle Paul. He got knocked off his horse and started following Jesus, and then he served faithfully the church for 13 years, and then he was like delivering, I think at one point he was, if I'm recalling correctly, he was delivering offerings in between churches. And then at different points in his life, he's writing letters to the church. And then near the end of his life, he's literally standing before governors and kings. And so at which point in his life was he walking in his calling, or was his calling expanding as he chose to say yes to these different opportunities? And you can like kind of go down the line with that. And so I can see that in your life too, like all these different things. But I think something that can happen sometimes is we get locked in to this
Mm-hmm.
idea of calling and what that means, particularly in specific roles or
Yeah.
titles.
Yeah.
Why do you think that struggle can exist?
I think it really exists with Gen Z and millennials as
Mm.
much as anybody, because they're the two most purpose-driven generations out of the six that exist right now. Like, and they've got, which is a great thing. Like, I want to be a part of something that matters, right? And what I found though is a lot of young leaders, when they feel so dialed in on calling, and then all of a sudden going and doing this job or picking up that thing, or like these roles or opportunities or tasks are below the calling, and you're going, oh, no, 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 this is all part of it, right? The calling is to bring God glory and to serve others around us, and I don't care which position you're sitting in. That requires a constant, yeah, I'll do that, no problem. Like, yeah, sure. Like, and so I think that's one piece I think about, is that we start putting the calling and then start running our task through, is that going to fit that perfectly? And you're going, I don't know how that exists. But I do think you can articulate for yourself what is the basic of it. One for me, in college, people have been telling me, hey, you need to go into ministry. And I was like, not unless I feel quote unquote called. And, um, and again, I think some people take this to an extreme. Like, if I don't have a job, but I feel called to this thing, I'm going to go get a job. I don't care if it fits perfectly or not, because my calling is to take care of my family. Right. And so if that means I'm at Home Depot for a season because that's the only way I can provide something, I'm going to go get a job at Home Depot. Right. And, um, but I've watched people that'll go 2 years without a job because they're waiting on this thing, because their calling is whatever. And I'm going, yeah, no, like that's just bad leadership. You're just like, that to me is like, what's the word? Anyway, the word's not coming to me, but it's negligence. That's the word. It like, okay, great. Here's the thing, Evan, and for me, I see these as opportunities. Now, again, what I won't do is something that goes against those deep inner like principles or belief systems of like, yeah, I ain't working with that client because what they do for an industry does not fit within the scope of what I believe, care about, whatever. But within that frame, I'm okay with whatever that turns out to be. Now, again, going back to college, felt called in the ministry, felt like God one night, just, it was a powerful Holy Spirit moment. And from there, I just started again being curious, what's the next step? If you would have asked me at 20, what that thing was, I would have told you, I think college ministry. You heard my story. Do you know how much college ministry I did?
Right.
Minutes.
Mm.
I mean, I did a little more than that, but like my point is, that was the first step of it. And then I just took the next step and the next step. If you would have told me I'd ever write a leadership book, there is zero chance I would have said, oh yeah, it makes sense. There's a reason I dedicated the second one to my 420 SAT and score in English, because that's not very good. So I was not thinking, oh, you know what? I'm going to write some books one day. my point in saying all that is our callings just kind of work themselves out as long as we're staying connected to the source, as long as we are in step, in dependence on the Holy Spirit to guide us in those things. But here's what I would say, and I would charge every leader from 20 to 200, nobody's that old, but 20 to 80, nothing is below your calling. Like if it means you got to go pick up the trash in the building because everybody forgot, then you go pick up the trash in the building. Like to me, that's where the principles of the Spirit or principles of the kingdom kind of play into our calling, is going, yes, as the president of the organization, you have earned the right to not do those things. But guess what? Your team notices when you do. And oh, by the way, you're serving something way bigger than yourself. And to do that means, yeah, hey, what do you need? How do I serve? What does that look like? To me, the greatest question you can ask, all the way up to the deepest, the most fulfilling part of your calling, is, how do I serve those around me? That to me is how you keep the calling very central to what you do.
Love that. Okay, last question for you. What does flourishing mean to you nowadays?
I think flourishing to me nowadays, one is dependence on the Holy Spirit on a regular basis of just feeling connected. Two is really deep friendships. When my wife and I went away for a day or two after we decided to move, and just said, hey, let's pray. I don't want to just go get a house. I want God to give us some sort of direction of what we're going to do when we get back that's different than when we were there before. And then what house would accommodate that? Well, one of the big things for me is I host trips. I take a lot of my longtime friends, and one of the most consistent things they say is, you're the reason that we all get together. Like, you kind of make it happen and all that kind of stuff. So I'm just going to be real intentional about that. Is going, hey guys, once a month, come to the house. We're going to hang out. We're going to, whatever that looks like. I'm still processing that. But what I mean by that, but why that matters is because I'm better when I'm in a close connection of men, specifically my friends, and then my wife and I are in a good place. So flourishing to me has a very spiritual component and a very practical component of great relationships. Work is work, and I love how it does that. But even as my wife and I were processing, I was like, Carrie, I'm gonna be 50 next year, which is crazy. What is the Reagin business? Mm-hmm. Not just what do I do for work? What do you do for work? For the next 20 years do we want to build together with our family? Because these work things can help fund that. They can help create doors for that, open opportunities for that. But I don't want it to just be work for work's sake. And again, I love what I do, and there's a calling in it. I feel like I'm moving people in good ways, so that's fulfilling in its own right. But what is our thing? Like, how do we build the thing together? What does that look like? So flourishing to me is when those pieces are all kind of aligning. That I'm a pretty healthy person, that I'm taking care of myself physically and emotionally and spiritually, but also I'm serving the people around me and creating some deep connections along the way.
I love that, Tyler. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. For those who want to follow along, see what you're up to, learn more about the different services that you're offering, what's the best way to connect with you to see what you're up to?
Yeah, the two best places I'm probably the most active is tylerreagin.com. I do a newsletter trying to kind of just keep encouraging folks around stuff. I'm actually working on some new kind of products and offerings there for people online that, most of my work is in person with organizations, but one of the things that God's continued to open doors is coaching coaches, people that want to coach, and teaching kind of the ways I've been doing that. So, but you go to Tyler Reagin, REAGIN.com, or just same thing on Instagram. That's probably the other best place, is just Tyler Reagin. That's my handle. Yeah. @ Tyler Reagin. So yeah, thanks for having me, by the way, Evan.
Absolutely. It was my honor. Thanks again.